long buried, and a son who never learned how to let his heart speak before his hands did. Spencer wasn't the kind of man who feared storms, wild horses, or Montana winters. But the moment he heard his father say the words, "I arranged for you to marry her," a fear he had no name for settled deep in his chest. It stayed there, silent and heavy, through church services, long days working the ranch, and nights when he stared at the ceiling wondering how a man was supposed to be a husband, when he had barely figured out how to be himself. The McCall ranch stretched wide under the Montana sun, 3,000 acres of dust, wind, and stubborn men who didn't speak unless necessary. After Spencer's mother died, Tenderness left the house and never returned. The walls heard more grunts than greetings, more slammed doors than laughter, and Spencer grew up learning that problems were fixed with muscle, not words. By 25, he could mend a fence in a blizzard and break a wild horse before breakfast, but he couldn't remember the last time he told someone how he felt. Then came Flora Moore. He first saw her outside the small, white church in Helena on a cold Sunday morning. She stood between her sisters, hands clasped in front of her, head bowed like she was trying not to take up too much space. Her dress was simple, faded in places, but her eyes, soft, warm, almost golden, lifted to meet his, and Spencer felt something shift inside him, something unfamiliar and frightening. Their first conversation was awkward. Spencer barely knew how to talk to women, let alone one he'd been promised to. Flora's voice was quiet, unsure, but honest. When she asked him straight out if he wanted the marriage, he could tell she wasn't being bold, just scared. And when she whispered, "I only want to know if you'll be kind to me," Spencer felt a sting in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with shame. He promised kindness. It was the only thing he was sure he could give. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and questions he didn't know how to answer. Questions from his brothers, teasing and crude. Questions from his father, sharp and heavy. And worse, the quiet questions inside himself. A man could feel strong his whole life, then discover in one moment he had nothing but uncertainty, where strength should be. The wedding day came with a clear blue sky, and a wind cold enough to numb fingers and courage alike. Spencer stood at the front of the church, palms sweating, stomach tied in knots. When the doors opened and Flora stepped inside, he forgot how to breathe. Her dress was plain, sewn by her sisters, and her hands trembled around a tiny bouquet of wildflowers. But her eyes found his, and there was trust there, fragile but real. Vows were exchanged. A brief, awkward kiss followed. The congregation whispered kindly, pretending not to notice how stiff the new couple stood at the altar. Spencer wasn't embarrassed for himself. He was embarrassed for her. Flora deserved a husband who knew how to be gentle, how to lead, how to kiss properly. Instead, she got him, a man who could rope a steer in seconds, but froze when her lips touched his. The supper afterward was lively and warm. People laughed, music drifted through the ranch house, and Flora smiled shyly at compliments from neighbors. But with every hour that passed, with every plate cleared and lantern dimmed, the weight on Spencer's shoulders grew heavier, because he knew the night was coming. The night everyone whispered about, the night he had no idea how to face. Flora felt it too. Spencer could see it in the way her hands shook as she cleared the last of the dishes, in the nervous glances she kept giving the stares, in the way she smiled at him but couldn't quite hold it. When the final guest said goodnight, the house fell into a silence so thick, Spencer felt it pressing against his ribs. He turned to Flora. She stood near the dying fire, twisting her fingers together, cheeks flushed with worry. "Should we?" she whispered, nodding toward the stairs. Spencer swallowed hard. "I guess we should." They climbed the steps like two people walking toward a cliff's edge, neither brave enough to admit they were scared. The bedroom looked cleaner than Spencer had ever seen it. Fresh curtains, new quilt, the scent of soap instead of dust. It should have comforted him, but instead it only reminded him of expectations he didn't know how to meet. Flora stood near the window, her breath shallow, her hands clasped at her waist. Spencer stood by the door, unsure if he should speak or step closer or pretend he wasn't shaking inside his boots. "I can change behind the screen," Flora said softly. "Right," Spencer replied, turning his back quickly. Fabric rustled. Spencer's heartbeat thundered. Shame and nerves tangled so tightly inside him he could barely think. When Flora finally said, "You can turn around now," Spencer did, and froze. She stood in a simple white nightdress, her arms crossed over her stomach, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked young and frightened and fragile in a way that made Spencer's chest ache with protectiveness he didn't know how to voice. "I've never—" Flora began, her cheeks reddening. "Me neither," Spencer admitted. They stared at the bed, then at each other, then away again. The silence was awkward and painful, but beneath it was something deeper. Two strangers trying their hardest to be brave for one another. "Maybe," Flora whispered, "we can just talk a little first." Quote. And for the first time that night, Spencer felt himself breathe easier. Spencer sat beside Flora on the edge of the bed, leaving a careful space between them, like he was afraid any sudden movement might startle her. Outside, the wind brushed against the window pane, a soft sound that reminded him of long winters and quiet nights spent alone. But this night wasn't quiet, not inside him. His heart beat hard enough he thought she might hear it. Flora folded her hands in her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't mean to seem frightened. I've never been alone in a room with a man before." Spencer lowered his head. "I'm not sure I've ever been alone in a room with a woman," he admitted. "Not like this." Flora glanced at him with a small, gentle smile. "So we're both inexperienced." He nodded. "Seems that way." They sat like that for a long moment, two people married by promise, bonded by duty, but strangers in every other way. Spencer wanted to say something that would ease the weight between them, something that would make her smile again, but he had no practice in comforting. "I can build a barn from the ground up," he finally muttered. "But I don't know how to do this. Not properly." Flora looked at him with soft surprise. "You don't have to pretend you do." Her honesty settled into him like a steadying hand. Spencer took a slow breath. "We don't have to rush anything tonight." "Not at all." He felt her stiff shoulders slowly relax. "We can take our time, Flora. No one needs to know how fast or how slow we go. It's just us in here." Flora's eyes glistened with relief. "Thank you, Spencer." He shifted, suddenly wishing he were braver with his words. Truth was, he didn't know how to comfort without touching, and he didn't know if touching would comfort or frighten her more. So he kept his hand still on his lap. "Were you nervous at the wedding?" Flora asked quietly. "Terrified," he answered before he could think. Her eyes widened a little. "You didn't look it." "I was trying not to faint," he said, dead serious. Flora burst into surprised laughter, a soft, sweet sound that filled the room like warm light. Spencer couldn't help but smile. It felt good, hearing her laugh. It loosened something inside him he hadn't realized was tight. When the laughter faded, Flora wiped her eyes. "I thought you were disappointed," she confessed. "I kept thinking maybe you wished it had been another woman at the altar." Spencer's brows drew together. "Why would you think that?" "Because you didn't smile," she said softly. Not once. Spencer rubbed the back of his neck. "Smiling isn't something I do well. My brothers say I look like I'm in pain when I try." Flora's lips curved again. "I saw you smile earlier when Leonard toasted us." "That was different." Spencer said he was proud. "I guess that made me proud too." Flora looked down at her hands. "You scare me a little," she admitted. Spencer felt a sting in his chest. "I don't want to." "I know," Flora whispered. "It's not you exactly, it's just everything is new." "My whole life changed today." Spencer nodded slowly. "Mine too." He took a breath and reached out, and then stopped just short of touching her. "May I?" he asked gently. Flora looked at his hand. Her eyes softened. "Yes." He placed his hand over hers, warm and careful. Her fingers trembled for a moment, then settled beneath his palm. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't bold. It was just a touch, a quiet promise that neither of them was alone. "You don't have to fear me," Spencer said softly. "I'm not good with words, but I won't ever hurt you." Quote, "I believe you," Flora whispered. They sat like that for a long while, talking in low voices about small things. The ranch, her sisters, his brothers, the first meal she ever learned to cook, the time he fell off a horse at age 12 and refused to admit it hurt. They traded stories until the lantern flame burned low and the fire crackled softly downstairs. At last, Flora's eyes grew heavy. "You should sleep," Spencer said gently. "So should you," she murmured. He hesitated. "We can sleep apart or together. Whatever makes you comfortable." Flora looked at the bed, then at him, and something brave flickered across her face. "We can share it," she whispered. "We're married." Spencer nodded. "All right." He rose and blew out the lantern, leaving only the moonlight spilling through the window. Flora climbed into bed first, pulling the blanket to her chin. Spencer joined her slowly, careful not to crowd her. They lay side by side, a respectful distance between them. Two warm shapes in the quiet dark. A long silence passed before Flora's soft voice broke it. "Spencer." "Yes, thank you for being patient." He stared at the ceiling, heart heavy with a feeling he didn't have a name for. "You don't have to thank me, Flora. I'm trying to be the husband you deserve." Another soft pause, I think. Flora whispered, "You already are." Those simple words settled into him with surprising force. And as the wind brushed gently outside their window, Spencer realized something he hadn't dared admit even to himself. He wanted to be worthy of her. He didn't sleep for a long time. Not because he was afraid of the night, but because he finally felt hope stirring where fear used to live. The weeks after their wedding night changed the McCall house in ways no one expected. Something gentle began growing between Spencer and Flora, slow and quiet, like spring grass pushing through frozen ground. They woke each morning with a little less fear. They shared more words at breakfast. Spencer found himself watching Flora when she kneaded dough or braided her hair, not out of duty, but because she brought a warmth into the room he didn't know he had been missing. Flora began learning the rhythms of ranch life, when to expect Spencer home, how to judge the weather by the color of the sky, when a horse needed rest instead of reins. Each evening, they sat by the fire and talked. Sometimes they talked about small things, like favorite foods or childhood memories. Other times they spoke about deeper worries like the future or what it meant to build a life together. Their marriage was still new, still delicate, but it was no longer built on fear. It was built on the careful trust they had begun to grow. One cold February morning, Flora stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oats, when Spencer came in from the barn. His coat was dusted with snow, and his cheeks were red from the wind. "Storm's coming," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "We'll need extra firewood." Flora nodded. "I'll keep the house warm." He stepped closer and took her cold hands in his rough ones. "You don't have to do everything alone. Tell me when you need help." Flora looked up at him, surprised. "All right, I will." It was a simple exchange, but it meant more than either of them said out loud. That evening, the snowfall thickened. Spencer shoveled a path, checked on the animals twice, and came inside tired but relieved. Flora had supper ready: warm stew, biscuits, and a pot of tea that filled the room with soft steam. They ate together at the small kitchen table while the wind howled outside. Spencer watched her bring a strand of hair behind her ear and realized something he had been trying not to admit. He cared for her. More than he expected. More than he was ready to say out loud. When Flora caught him staring, she blushed. "What is it?" He shook his head softly, just thinking. About what he hesitated, then told the truth about how different this house feels with you in it. Flora lowered her gaze, her cheeks warm. "Different. Good." "Good," Spencer said quietly. "Real good." That night, as they climbed into bed, Flora rested her head on his shoulder for the first time. Spencer wrapped an arm around her, gentle and unsure, like she was something precious he might break if he held too tight. "You're warm," she whispered. "You're small," he whispered back before he could stop himself. Flora smiled into the dark. "Is that bad?" "No," Spencer said. "Makes me want to take care of you." Flora's fingers curled lightly against his chest. "No one's ever said that to me before. No one ever should have needed to," he answered. The wind softened outside. The house creaked with the cold, and the space between them grew smaller, not from fear, but from a quiet closeness they were learning together. Spring came slowly to Montana. The snow melted, revealing soft earth and patches of stubborn grass. The river swelled with fresh, clear water, and Flora bloomed right along with the land. She planted flowers by the porch, swept the rooms until they smelled like soap and sunlight, and carefully stitched curtains that made the house feel less like a place of men and more like a home. Even Rowan and Dennis noticed the change. "You made this place look downright respectable," Rowan said one afternoon with a grin. Flora laughed softly. "I don't know about respectable, but I like to make things pretty." Dennis nodded. "Makes me feel like I shouldn't track mud everywhere." "You track mud everywhere anyway," Rowan snapped. Their bickering made Flora laugh so hard she wiped tears from her eyes. Spencer watched from the doorway, quietly grateful. His brothers had never shown affection like this with anyone. Flora softened them too. By early summer, Flora's cheeks glowed with health and happiness, and Spencer couldn't remember the last time he felt the old heaviness of loneliness. One warm June evening, they sat on the porch watching the last streaks of orange fade from the sky. Flora rested her head on Spencer's shoulder. He held her close, careful, but "Sure, Spencer," she said softly. I'm glad it was you." Quote, Spencer turned slightly. "What do you mean?" "My mother always told us marriage was a leap of faith," Flora whispered, "and I didn't know what kind of man you'd be. But now, I'm glad it was you at the church. I'm glad it's you beside me at night. I'm glad it's you." I wake up to Spencer swallowed hard, emotions gathering thick in his throat. "I'm glad it was you too," he finally said, voice rough but honest. "I never expected to feel this." "Not with anyone." Flora looked up at him. "Feel what?" He brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers, his touch slow and careful. Lucky her eyes softened Spencer. He leaned his forehead against hers, a quiet, tender gesture that spoke louder than words. "You're my wife," he whispered, "and every day I'm more thankful for that." Flora's breath caught, her hand settling over his. "Then we'll build a good life," she whispered together, and under the soft Montana twilight, with the evening breeze brushing through the tall grass, their love had started awkward and uncertain. But it was steady now, gentle and growing stronger with each passing day. Some stories begin with fire. Theirs began with kindness. And that was enough to last a lifetime.